The steady beeping of hospital monitors filled the quiet room as I lay there, exhausted but holding on to the happiest moment of my life, my newborn son Dylan. The early morning light came through the window, soft and warm, casting a golden glow on his tiny face. I could barely believe he was finally here, after 2 long years of trying. Everything felt perfect. I looked at him, memorizing every small movement, every little sound. It was the kind of peace I had imagined for months. That peace broke the moment Brandon walked into the room. He didn't smile. He didn't look at Dylan. His eyes were cold, distant, so unlike the man who had held my hand during labor just hours ago, whispering how proud he was, how excited he felt to start our new chapter. Now he stood stiffly at the foot of my bed, arms crossed, face unreadable. "I can't do this anymore, Skylar," he said, his voice low but firm. My body tensed. I thought I'd misheard him. But he continued, "I'm not ready for this responsibility." The words hit like a slap. My heart raced. Dylan stirred slightly in my arms, and I held him tighter, as if I could shield him from what was happening. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "We planned this. We wanted this." Brandon didn't look ashamed. He ran his fingers through his hair, a gesture I used to find charming. "I've been seeing someone else," he said. "Her name is Jennifer. She understands me. She understands what I want from life." His voice sounded distant, almost rehearsed, as if he had played out this conversation in his head many times before. "I can't be tied down with a family right now," he added. I stared at him, numb. Less than 24 hours ago, he was smiling, cutting the umbilical cord, telling me he'd never felt more alive. Now he was walking away, like none of it mattered. My body had just been through childbirth. I was still bleeding, still aching, and now this. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing grow shallow. The monitors picked up on it. A nurse peeked in, probably worried, but I waved her away. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely holding steady. 6 months, he said. Just like that. As if he were announcing a business deal. No apology. No guilt. Then he told me Jennifer worked at his firm. A new junior partner. He had even mentioned her once or twice at dinner. Called her brilliant. I hadn't thought much of it. All those late nights at the office, the weekend conferences, the business dinners. It all started making terrible sense. Dylan's tiny hand wrapped around my finger, pulling me back to the moment. Tears welled in my eyes. Not just from heartbreak, but from something deeper. A fierce, burning instinct to protect this child. I looked at Brandon and said, "You're making a mistake. This isn't just about you anymore. This is your son." He shook his head. "My lawyer will contact you about the divorce and child support." He turned to leave. My voice cracked as I called after him. "His name is Dylan, Brandon. Dylan Michael Harris. Remember that." He paused but didn't turn around. The door clicked shut behind him, and suddenly the room felt silent, hollow. I looked down at my son, still sleeping peacefully, unaware that the man who helped create him had just chosen to walk away. I let my tears fall silently on his soft hospital blanket. Then I made him a promise. "We're going to be okay, little one," I whispered. "Mommy's going to make sure of that." I didn't know then how much that single promise would reshape my entire life. I didn't know that Brandon's betrayal wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning. The nurse returned later that morning with a clipboard of discharge papers and a gentle smile that told me she had overheard more than she let on. "Do you want me to call someone?" she asked kindly. I almost said yes, but the truth was, there wasn't anyone to call. My parents had passed away in a car accident years ago, and Brandon had been the one who got me through that grief. The irony stung like salt in a fresh wound. My sister Kate lived across the country in California, caught up in her own busy life. Most of our friends were couples we met through Brandon's firm. I didn't even know whose side they'd take. I straightened my back, wiped my eyes, and gave the nurse a soft, "No, thank you." But I did accept her help packing my things. I moved slowly, my body aching in every way possible. Dylan fussed in his bassinet as I gathered the few belongings I had brought for the hospital stay. I whispered calming words to him, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I wasn't just packing a bag. I was packing away the future I thought I had. To my surprise, Ellen, my neighbor from down the hall, met me at the hospital entrance. She had heard from her sister, who worked as a maternity nurse, about what happened. "You don't have to go back in there alone," she said gently, motioning toward her car. I couldn't speak. I just nodded and climbed into the back seat beside Dylan's carrier. My heart pounded as we drove through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. The apartment I had decorated with love now felt like a stranger's home. When we arrived, Ellen said quietly, "I made up the guest room for you. I figured you might not want to sleep in your bedroom right now." I swallowed the lump in my throat and whispered, "Thank you." The thought of lying in that bed, the one Brandon and I had shared for 5 years, made my stomach twist. As I stepped inside, I noticed small but obvious signs that Brandon had already been here. His running shoes were gone. The goofy welcome mat we had picked out together had been replaced with a plain one. Inside, the changes were subtle. Only a few missing items, but the emptiness screamed at me. His laptop was no longer on the desk. Some clothes were gone. But he had left everything else, including the framed ultrasound picture still hanging on the fridge. That picture hit me harder than anything else. I stared at it, my chest tightening. We had been so excited that day. He had joked about the baby having his nose, and I had laughed until I cried. Now I couldn't even look at it without feeling sick. "I'll make some tea," Ellen said, moving toward the kitchen, giving me space to settle Dylan into the bassinet. I sat on the couch and opened my phone, more out of habit than purpose. A new text message lit up the screen. It was from Barbara, Brandon's mother. *Skylar, darling, please tell me this is all a misunderstanding. Brandon's not making any sense. Call me when you can. My fingers hovered over the reply button. Barbara had always treated me like the daughter she never had. I knew she'd be heartbroken. But how could I explain that her son had thrown away our family for a younger woman? That he had planned his exit for months while pretending to be excited about becoming a father? Ellen returned and set 2 steaming mugs on the table. "You don't have to answer anyone right now," she said gently. "Give yourself time to breathe." I nodded, but the pressure inside me kept building. "Everything we built," I said quietly. "Everything we planned, it was all based on 2 incomes. We maxed out our credit card renovating the nursery because Brandon said we should give our baby the best." My voice cracked. Had he already known he was going to leave? Was I being set up the whole time? "One step at a time," Ellen said, placing her hand on mine. "First, you need rest. The practical stuff can wait a few days." But it couldn't wait. Not really. My phone buzzed again, this time an email. The sender's name made my stomach drop. Brandon's lawyer. *Dear Mrs. Harrison, I have been retained by Brandon Harrison regarding your impending divorce. Please have your legal representative contact my office to discuss the terms. I didn't have a legal representative. I didn't have any savings outside our joint account, which I suddenly realized Brandon might have already cleaned out. My hands shook as I set the phone down. I couldn't breathe. Felt dizzy. Dylan's cry snapped me out of it. I stood, sore and heavy, and lifted him into my arms. His tiny body, warm and alive, brought me back to earth. "I think I need to make some calls tomorrow," I said slowly. "Kate might know a good lawyer. And I should talk to Principal Matthews about extending my maternity leave." Ellen nodded. "That's a good start. And Skylar, if you need anything, Tom and I can help. A loan, babysitting, whatever you need." Tears filled my eyes again. But this time they were tears of something else. Gratitude. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I had thought. That night, after Ellen left and Dylan finally fell asleep, I found myself wide awake, sitting at the small desk in the guest room. The glow from the baby monitor cast soft shadows on the wall. I opened a blank notebook and began making lists. It was something I'd always done when life felt too big. One list for legal questions. Another for financial documents to find. Another for people I might need to contact. With every item I wrote down, I felt a tiny bit more in control. While flipping through a drawer in the home office, I came across a business card I had almost forgotten. It was from a career coaching service I had considered last year when I was thinking about applying for a master's degree. I had brought it home, excited to talk to Brandon about it. But he had brushed off the idea, said it wasn't the right time. We were trying for a baby, and he said it would be too much. Now I wondered if that had been his way of keeping me dependent. I pinned the card to the bulletin board above the desk. It felt small, but it was something. A small act of reclaiming space that had been mine all along. Dylan made a soft sound in his sleep, and I walked over to check on him. Gently stroking his cheek, I whispered, "Maybe it's time for both of us to find out who we are without your father holding us back." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Sleepless nights, feedings, diaper changes, legal consultations, and endless paperwork. I was surviving barely. Then one morning, I sat at that same desk with a pile of papers spread around me. I was reviewing our finances, something I hadn't had the heart to do until then. The first red flag was the savings account. Nearly empty. Only my last paycheck was left. I checked the statement dates. Large transfers had started about 8 months ago, to an account I didn't recognize. My stomach turned. But what made my blood run cold was the mortgage paperwork. The refinancing documents Brandon had rushed me to sign during a week when I could barely get out of bed due to morning sickness. He told me it was for a better interest rate. I had signed without reading every page. He had taken out a massive home equity loan. Our mortgage was now almost double what it had been. And it was all in my name. I sat there in shock, the edges of the room blurring. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was planned. It was financial. He had known what he was doing. He had made sure to leave me with the burden. A text buzzed on my phone. It was from Kate. Asterisk just landed. Heading to the lawyer's office now. You okay? Asterisk. I wanted to say yes. Instead I typed. Asterisk found something big. Really bad. Asterisk. Her reply came instantly. Asterisk don't say more over text. Document everything. I'll be there in 2 hours. Asterisk. Not long after the doorbell rang. I checked the security camera. Something Ellen's husband Tom had installed after he noticed Brandon's Range Rover parked across the street one night. It was Barbara. She stood on the porch, holding what looked like a photo album. I hadn't spoken to her since her text message. I had ignored her calls. But now, something about seeing her, alone, vulnerable, carrying memories, made me want to open the door. Maybe it was the weight of everything I'd just discovered. Maybe I needed a witness. When I let her in, I was struck by how different she looked. Her silver hair was undone, her eyes tired and red behind her glasses. Still she smelled the same, coffee and Chanel No. 5. "Oh, sweetheart," she said and pulled me into a hug. For a moment I let her. Felt strange but not wrong. We moved to the living room. "Dylan's sleeping," I said softly. "We need to keep our voices down." She nodded, set the album on the table, and sat carefully on the edge of the couch. "I've been trying to understand," she said slowly. "Brandon won't tell me anything except that he's found someone else. But yesterday I came across some old photos. And I found this." She opened the album. The first photo was of Brandon and me on our wedding day. We looked so young, so happy. I blinked back tears. But the next photo made my breath catch. A wedding picture, older, faded. But the groom looked like Brandon. A woman stood beside him, smiling. "That's Richard," Barbara said, her voice quiet. "Brandon's father. And his first wife, Linda. The marriage no one talks about." She paused, then added. "He left her in the hospital after giving birth to their son. 6 months later he met me." I stared at her. "Brandon has a half-brother." Barbara nodded, wiping away a tear. "His name is Daniel. He tried to contact Brandon over the years, but Brandon never wanted to meet him. I thought he was just trying to protect himself from pain. But now I see it clearly. He wasn't trying to protect himself. He was repeating it. I felt a chill spread through me. Did Richard leave her like this? Financially? Yes. Barbara's voice broke. He cleaned out their accounts, remortgaged the house behind her back. Linda lost everything. She and Daniel moved in with her parents. I never reached out. I just tried to forget it happened. She pulled an envelope from her purse. This is a check for $50,000. My savings. It's not a loan. It's what I should have done 30 years ago. I stared at it. Brandon will be furious if he finds out. Let him be, she said, her voice steadier now. I won't sit back while my grandson grows up in hardship because I was too afraid to stand up to my son. Dylan stirred on the monitor. I stood up, heart pounding. As I reached the nursery door, Barbara said softly, "There's something else. Linda, she didn't just survive. She started one of the most successful crisis shelters in Washington." I stopped and turned. "She took her pain," Barbara continued, "and turned it into purpose." I walked into the nursery with those words echoing in my head. Dylan was awake now, reaching up toward me with tiny fingers. I lifted him into my arms and held him close. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe, like Linda, I had a chance to turn this pain into something more. The next morning, after feeding Dylan and getting him down for another nap, I sat at the desk again, the envelope from Barbara still resting where I had left it. I stared at it, unsure if taking it would mean admitting defeat or accepting a lifeline. I finally picked it up and placed it inside a drawer. There were bigger things I needed to focus on. I opened my laptop and searched the name that had been echoing in my head all night. Linda Harrison, Seattle Crisis Shelter. The first result was a place called New Beginnings Women's Center. And there she was, Linda, now in her 60s, pictured on the homepage, standing proudly in front of a shelter building. The caption under her photo read, "Founder and Executive Director." I clicked through the site, reading every word, my heart pounding with recognition. Her story was there. A young mother abandoned by her husband in a hospital room. Just like me. A woman who rebuilt her life and then spent it helping others do the same. I found a "Contact Us" button and opened a message window. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What could I possibly say? After a long pause, I began to type. "Dear Miss Harrison, you don't know me, but my name is Skylar Harrison. Until 2 weeks ago, I was married to your son's half-brother, Brandon. I recently discovered our stories might be more connected than I ever imagined." I saved the draft. I wasn't quite ready to send it. But writing it made something inside me settle. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore. I was trying to understand. Trying to move forward. That night, as I rocked Dylan to sleep in the nursery, I thought about the Harrison men. The legacies they had left behind. Wives abandoned. Children forgotten. And I made a quiet promise to my son. It stops with us. He would not grow up in the shadow of that pattern. He would see his mother rebuild. He would grow up knowing strength that didn't come from money or control, but from healing and truth. The next morning, while I was on a video call with my principal discussing my extended leave, a new email popped up. The subject line made my breath catch. From Linda Harrison. I ended the call quickly and opened it. "Dear Skylar. Your message caught me off guard. In 30 years, you are the first person from Richard's new family to reach out. I spent hours trying to decide how to respond, but in the end the answer was simple. Yes. I very much like to talk. I'll actually be in your area next month for a conference on domestic financial abuse. Perhaps we could meet. There's so much I wish someone had told me when I was in your position. With hope. Linda *. My eyes skimmed the email again and again. Conference on financial abuse. It felt like fate. She had even attached the flyer. The title of her keynote session read, Breaking the Cycle. Financial Coercion in Modern Relationships. As I stared at the screen, Dylan cooed from his play mat nearby, reaching for a soft toy above him. "What do you think?" I asked him, my voice light. He let out a joyful gurgle. Yeah, I whispered. I think so too. Before I could type a response to Linda, my phone rang. It was Patricia, my lawyer. The judge granted our emergency petition, she said quickly. Brandon's assets are frozen. He's required to provide immediate temporary support. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That's incredible. Thank you. There's something else, Patricia continued, her voice dropping. Jennifer walked into my office this morning. She wants to talk to you. My heart skipped. About what? She wouldn't say. Only that it's important. She seemed shaken. I told her absolutely not without your presence, but I wanted to check with you. I glanced at Dylan, who was now babbling happily on the mat. I thought about everything I had learned, everything I had been piecing together. About Linda. About the past. About Brandon's betrayal. Set it up, I said after a pause. But not at your office. Somewhere public. 2 days later, I sat at a small cafe across from Patricia, Dylan's stroller beside me, angled so I could see him at all times. I sipped water, trying to calm the nerves twisting in my stomach. Jennifer arrived right on time. She looked nothing like the confident junior partner I remembered from Brandon's office parties. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, her makeup uneven, and her suit wrinkled. She clutched her handbag like it was armor. Thank you for meeting me, she said softly, barely above a whisper. I know you must hate me. I don't hate you, I said, honestly surprised at how much I meant it. I don't know you well enough to hate you. She flinched and reached into her bag. You need to see this. She pulled out a small USB drive and placed it on the table. Brandon. He's not who either of us thought he was. Patricia raised a hand. Before we go further, I need to say this could be used in legal proceedings. Are you sure you want to continue? Jennifer nodded. Tears glimmered in her eyes. I'm pregnant, she said. When I told him, he laughed. Said I was stupid to think he'd leave his cushy setup for me. He said once the divorce was settled, he'd be getting half of your assets. That he'd collect alimony because you make more than I do as a partner. That's not even true, I said, stunned. He makes 3 times what I do. On paper, yes, she said bitterly. But for the past year, he's had most of his actual compensation funneled through a shell company. He's been building this plan for a long time. The drive has everything: emails, bank records, recordings. I started gathering it after I got suspicious. Patricia pulled out her laptop and began copying the files. This is essentially a confession to conspiracy and fraud, she said. Jennifer looked at me. I'll testify. I'm not letting him do to me what he did to you. What his father did to Linda. I stared at her. You know about Linda? She nodded. I did some digging. After Brandon's reaction to my pregnancy. There's a pattern with the men in his family. They pick women with careers. They wait until pregnancy. Then they cut off support and leave. Dylan stirred, and I adjusted his blanket. Jennifer's eyes softened. I'm keeping my baby, she said suddenly. The firm has good maternity policies. Ironically, I helped write them. She laughed quietly, bitterly. I thought you should know everything. And maybe our children shouldn't grow up not knowing each other. Before I could respond, a new message popped up on my phone. From Linda. Skylar. Something told me to dig deeper into Brandon's recent activity. We need to talk sooner than next month. There's more to this than you know. There are other women you need to meet. I looked up at Jennifer, then at Patricia, who was already reviewing the files with growing concern. Dylan slept peacefully beside us, unaware of how tangled his family history was becoming. I turned back to Jennifer. What do you know about Brandon's uncle's first wife? Yes. She swallowed hard. More than I ever wanted to. But not enough. I had a feeling that was about to change. Later that evening, after Patricia left with a drive and Jennifer went home to her sister's place, I sat at the desk staring at my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keys as I opened a blank document. I didn't know where to start, there was just too much. But then I remembered the faces on the screen during Linda's video call. She had arranged for me to speak with women who, like me, had been abandoned by Harrison men. Not just emotionally but financially, legally, and systemically. When the call started the next day, my screen filled with unfamiliar faces that somehow felt instantly familiar. Women of different ages and backgrounds, all bound by one thing: betrayal with a Harrison signature. "I'm Rachel," said a woman in her early 40s, her auburn hair pulled back neatly. "Jack Harrison was my first husband, Brandon's uncle. He walked out when our son was 3 days old. I was still in a hospital gown at Miami General." "I'm Catherine," said another softly, her British accent subtle. "I married Peter Harrison, Richard's cousin. He left me and our newborn in 2019. I was in London." Same story, different country. Linda spoke calmly but with authority, guiding the conversation like someone who had spent her life helping women stand after being broken. "Skylar and Jennifer," she said, "you're not just the latest victims. You might be the last if we can stop this." Jennifer joined from her apartment, visibly shaken but also visibly pregnant now. She raised a trembling hand to her stomach. "Because we have proof," she said. "Exactly," Linda nodded. "They were careful for years. Covered their tracks. But Brandon made a mistake. He got sloppy. And he got greedy." Catherine shared her screen, revealing a series of spreadsheets and emails. "These are bank transfers between family-run companies. Harrison Holdings LLC is their center. They use it to move money between family members during and after divorces. It's not just individual cases. This is coordinated." My eyes scanned the transfers. Some of the names matched the ones Kate and Patricia had uncovered while tracing Brandon's hidden accounts. The company that had received our home equity loan was there too. It was all connected. "They target women with careers," Linda explained, "especially those with steady income or long-term job security. Pregnancy makes you physically and emotionally vulnerable. That's when they strike." Jennifer nodded slowly. "It's about control. They isolate you when you're most dependent. Then they leave, and make sure you're too exhausted to fight back." Rachel added, "They count on silence, on our shame. But they didn't count on us finding each other." As I listened, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was clarity. I had been blindsided, humiliated, left alone at my weakest. But now I wasn't alone. We had data. We had evidence. We had a pattern. And we had each other. Patricia joined the call then, her tone serious. "The files Jennifer provided show clear coordination between the Harrison men. That's conspiracy. We're not just talking about divorce fraud. We're talking about organized financial crime." The words hit like a hammer. This wasn't just Brandon trying to leave. This was Brandon trying to destroy. Strategically. Methodically. Just like his father had done. Just like his uncle. Just like his cousin. "I want to speak," I said suddenly. "At the conference. I want to tell my story. Not just about Brandon but about all of it. People need to hear how they do this. How they hide behind suits and family dinners while plotting their exits on spreadsheets." Linda smiled for the first time during the call. "I was hoping you'd say that. But Skylar, be ready. When you expose men like this, they don't back down quietly." Almost on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from Brandon. *, "We need to talk. Things don't have to get ugly. Think about Dylan. *. I stared at it, then looked back at the video call. Linda, who had turned her pain into leadership. Rachel, who ran her own law firm now. Catherine, who counseled women in crisis. Jennifer, who had gone from mistress to ally to survivor. "They've been counting on our silence," I said, feeling strength rise in me like a tide. "But shame dies in the light. And I'm done being quiet." The meeting continued late into the night. Plans were drawn. Evidence was catalogued. Strategies were laid out. By the end of the call we had a name. The Financial Abuse Recovery Network. Not just for us but for the hundreds of women who were reaching out now. telling us their stories. That night, after Dylan had fallen asleep and the house was still, I opened my laptop again. Not to research or plan, but to write. Not just my story, but our story. The story of women who were told they were too emotional, too weak, too naive. Women who had been left behind but chose to rise instead of fall. Dear Brandon, I typed. I received your message. You're right, this doesn't have to get ugly. Just has to change. And change is coming, whether you and your family are ready or not. The morning of the conference arrived with a sky streaked in soft pink and gold. I stood behind the curtain of the main auditorium, gripping my note cards with sweaty hands. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Dylan was with Ellen in the front row. She had insisted on taking the day off work just to be here. Jennifer sat nearby, her small baby bump now obvious beneath her dress. Rachel and Catherine flanked her, calm and composed, ready. Barbara had texted me just minutes earlier. Richard found out about the conference. They're in panic mode. Stay safe. I'm proud of you, I read the message twice before tucking my phone into my bag. Linda stood at the podium, doing her final microphone check. When she finished, she turned to me and gently squeezed my shoulder. You're ready, she said. And for the first time I believed her. The hall was full. Advocates, lawyers, survivors, social workers. And tucked among them, I spotted movement that made my blood run cold. Brandon. And behind him Richard. Two more Harrison men I didn't recognize followed, splitting off and taking seats in different sections of the audience. Patricia had warned us this could happen. They were here to disrupt, to intimidate. But they were too late. Linda stepped forward and addressed the room. Financial abuse doesn't always look like what we expect. It's not always bruises or shouting. Sometimes it looks like love. It wears suits, smiles in family photos. And it destroys lives one signature at a time. She paused, then said, Now I'd like to introduce someone who uncovered just how deep this problem goes. Please welcome Skylar Harrison. The applause thundered around me as I stepped onto the stage. I saw Brandon smirk as I walked past, the same one he wore when he handed me divorce papers. He thought he knew what I would say. He thought I would cry, accuse, break down. He didn't expect me to start with a chart. Financial abuse leaves a paper trail, I began. I know because my husband left one. I clicked to the next slide. A breakdown of our joint finances, showing how Brandon drained our accounts slowly, months before he told me he wanted out. When I was in the hospital giving birth to our son, my husband was preparing to abandon us. But he didn't just walk away. He made sure I would be left with debt, with a mortgage I couldn't afford, and no legal protection. Another slide. Emails, bank transfers, legal documents. A systematic map of how the Harrison men coordinated to do the same to woman after woman. This isn't just my story, I said. It's Rachel's. It's Catherine's. It's Jennifer's. It's Linda's. And today it stops. In the back of the hall, Richard stood up, likely ready to leave. But Rachel's voice rang out from the audience, clear and sharp. Going somewhere, Uncle Richard. Like you did at Miami General 12 years ago. Gasps filled the room. Brandon's expression twisted. And then one by one women stood. Each held up proof, emails, texts, account statements. Each had a story. Each one connected to a Harrison man. They target women with stable careers, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the rising murmurs. They wait for a moment of vulnerability, usually pregnancy. Then they isolate, control, and finally abandon. But they don't just leave. They take everything they can on the way out. Brandon stood, moving toward the stage. You can't do this, he shouted. You're going to destroy our family. I looked right at him. You did that yourself. We're just bringing it into the light. Linda stepped forward and took the microphone beside me. 30 years ago, I thought I was alone. I was told my experience was unique. Today, we are announcing the formation of the Financial Abuse Recovery Network. We will offer legal aid, financial counseling, and, most importantly, a community. Because the best weapon against systematic abuse is women supporting women. At that moment, Barbara walked through the auditorium doors. Richard froze mid-step. She moved past him without a glance and joined us on stage. "The cycle ends here," she said into the mic, her voice unwavering. "I'm pledging my personal inheritance to fund this network. No more women will face this alone." The rest of the presentation moved in a blur. Reporters asked questions. Audience members clapped and cried. And slowly, the Harrison men slipped away, defeated and exposed. When it was finally over, I found myself sitting in a quiet corner of the hall with Jennifer. She rested her hand on her belly and looked at me with damp eyes. "I was terrified today," she admitted. "But watching you, we're going to be okay." He nodded. "Our children are going to grow up knowing something different. Something better." That evening, while Ellen helped me put Dylan to bed, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was a photo of a young man with Brandon's eyes and a simple message beneath it. "I'm Daniel. Linda told me what you all did today. Thank you. Thank you for making sure no more Harrison boys grow up thinking this is okay." I looked down at Dylan, now sleeping peacefully in his crib, and felt something in me settle. We had broken something terrible today. But we had also begun something powerful. Something lasting. 1 month after the conference, my home office no longer looked like the scattered mess it had been during the early weeks of my collapse. It was now full of movement, light, and purpose. Sticky notes covered the wall above my desk. Laptops stayed open, each with a different time zone on the screen. Calls came in from Seattle, London, Miami. Linda, Catherine, Rachel, Jennifer. We spoke almost daily now, building something none of us had ever imagined. Dylan played nearby in his pack and play, babbling to himself while I spoke with Rachel, who had just finished another intake call. 20 more women have come forward, she said. Not all Harrison-related, but the stories are the same. Career women, financial manipulation, pregnancy, isolation, then abandonment. "We're going to need more counselors," Catherine added from another square on my screen. "Our wait list is growing by the hour. Every woman we help brings 3 more. A notification blinked on my screen. It was from Brandon's lawyer. The subject line read, "Settlement offer." I didn't open it. "Not yet." "Skylar," Linda said gently, "have you thought more about the education program?" I clicked over to the draft proposal I had been working on. "I think it's time," I said. "I want to take what we've learned and turn it into something that helps people before it gets this far. I'm building a curriculum for financial literacy workshops. Not just budgeting, but how to recognize red flags, protect your assets, understand how financial abuse works inside a relationship." "Perfect timing," Rachel said. "Barbara's seed funding is secure, and 2 corporate sponsors are ready to contribute." Just then, a knock sounded at my front door. I glanced at the security camera feed. It was Jennifer. "I need to take a quick break," I told the group, then went to let her in. She looked tired. Her skin was pale, her steps a bit slower, but her eyes were steady. "They sent a settlement," she said, walking past me with her phone in hand. "Same day. Both of us. Classic Harrison play." I led her into the office. "Mine too," I said. "Didn't open it yet. Want to look together?" We sat side by side at my desk and read through both offers. On the surface they looked generous. Child support, property buyouts, health coverage. But buried in the legal language was the catch. We'd have to sign non-disclosure agreements. No interviews, no lawsuits, no more speaking out. "They want to buy our silence," Jennifer said, voice flat. "They're scared," I replied, scrolling through the fine print. The conference worked. Richard's firm lost 3 major clients last week. "Good." Jennifer leaned back and placed a protective hand on her belly. "Let them feel a little of what we felt." My phone buzzed again. This time it was Barbara. They're getting desperate. Richard just tried to access my trust fund. Day alert. Jennifer sighed. "Sometimes I forget she's going through this too. 30 years of marriage, and she chose to stand with us. She gave us credibility we never could have earned on our own, I said. Without Barbara, the media wouldn't have taken the conference seriously. The rest of the afternoon moved quickly. I had a call with my principal about developing the new financial literacy program for high school students. We discussed a pilot class starting in the fall, teaching teenagers the basics of credit, joint accounts, and the warning signs of coercion. After that, Patricia and I met virtually to expand her firm's services to cover more financial abuse cases. By early evening, I joined a private support group session as a guest speaker. 15 women sat in that call, most with fresh wounds, fresh stories. I told mine again, not to relive it, but to show what could come after. They didn't need a fairy tale. They needed proof that you could survive. Later, Ellen came by with dinner. She brought her daughter too, and the girls played together on the floor while we sat in the kitchen, watching and sipping tea. Ellen looked at me quietly, then said, "You've got that look again." Smiled. "What look?" "The one that means you're planning something new." She wasn't wrong. There was a document sitting quietly in my drafts folder. The outline of a book. Not just about me. Not just about the Harrisons. But about the broader issue that had stayed hidden for far too long. Financial abuse that looked respectable. That came with compliments and promises and slow isolation. Abuse that wore a smile. "I've been thinking," I said softly, "about what Linda said, turning pain into purpose." Ellen nodded. "When Brandon left, he thought he was ending your story." "But really," I whispered, watching Dylan crawl toward her daughter with a wide grin. "He was just giving me a better one to tell." That night, when the house was quiet and Dylan was sleeping, I opened my laptop and began to write again. This time it wasn't just for me. It was for every woman who had opened her email and felt her stomach drop. Every woman who had signed a form she didn't understand. Every woman who thought it was just her. This wasn't a story about heartbreak. It was a story about what came after. About women who refused to stay quiet. About finding strength not in perfection but in survival. Just as I finished typing the final line of the chapter, a new message popped up. It was from Daniel. *Mom showed me your proposal for teaching financial literacy. I'm a teacher too. Maybe we could collaborate. Another text followed immediately after. I've spent my whole life trying not to become like my father or brother. I want to help make this right. I stared at his words, my heart tight with something I couldn't quite name. Forgiveness, maybe. Or just relief. Dylan stirred upstairs and I sat back, closing my eyes. The Harrison men had spent decades building a system that rewarded control and punished care. But in doing so, they had accidentally created something they never expected. They had created us. 1 year to the day after Brandon walked into that hospital room and walked out of our lives, I stood in a different hospital corridor. This time I wasn't the one in pain. I was holding Dylan, now a lively toddler who clung to my hip with wide, curious eyes, while Jennifer gripped my hand on one side and her sister Emma held the other. She was breathing through another contraction, sweat glistening on her forehead, but her jaw was set with focus. Outside the wide hospital window, the sun was rising over the city, soft and golden, just like it had the day Dylan was born. Only this time the light felt different, hopeful. "I can't believe he's actually missing this too," Jennifer said, panting between breaths. There was sadness in her voice, but also anger. "Even after everything." "Hey," I said firmly, adjusting Dylan on my hip. "Look around. Look at who's here. Look at who's not missing it." She blinked at me, then slowly glanced around the room. Barbara sat in the corner knitting a soft pink blanket with quiet concentration. Linda had flown in from Seattle the moment Jennifer's contractions started, and was now handing tissues and ice chips like a seasoned nurse. Rachel and Catherine were on their way from the airport, delayed by a storm but determined to make it. We had become our own kind of family, stronger than blood, stronger than marriage. Built from truth. Forged through fire. "Another one coming," the nurse said, and Jennifer squeezed our hands, gritting her teeth through the next wave. I counted her breaths, just like she had counted mine 1 year ago, in another hallway when I had no one. Hours later, Jennifer lay in bed, her face pale but glowing, holding her newborn daughter to her chest. The room was filled with quiet joy. I stood nearby with Dylan, who watched the baby curiously, his little fingers gripping the edge of the blanket as if trying to understand what had just changed. "I want to name her Hope," Jennifer said softly. "Because that's what all of you gave me, when I thought I had none left." Barbara wiped tears from her eyes as she finished stitching the last edge of the blanket and handed it to Jennifer. "It's perfect," she whispered. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Attached was a photo of that morning's paper. The front page headline read, "Harrison Financial Group under federal investigation for systematic fraud." Below that, Financial Abuse Recovery Network celebrates 1 year. Over 500 women helped. Linda caught sight of the headline over my shoulder. "Should we tell her?" she asked. I looked over at Jennifer, still in that quiet, sacred bubble of first-moment motherhood, and shook my head. "Let her have this moment," I whispered. "The rest can wait." The investigation had been building for months. Between the evidence Jennifer had provided, the victims who had come forward, and the trail we had all helped uncover, the authorities had everything they needed. Brandon, Richard, and others were finally facing real consequences. Not just in the court of public opinion, but in real courtrooms. But as I stood there watching Jennifer hum softly to her daughter, I realized that wasn't the victory that mattered most. This moment. The baby who would never know abandonment. The women who showed up not because they had to, but because they refused to let another woman go through it alone. The weekly support groups were thriving. Patricia's law office had expanded to take on more financial abuse cases. Catherine's counseling services now had a team. Rachel was fighting for new legal protections in Florida. And my high school class on financial literacy had grown from 10 students to nearly 50. Dylan squirmed in my arms, and I leaned down, lowering him gently beside Jennifer's bed. "Want to meet your sister?" I asked him softly. We had decided long ago that our children would grow up as siblings. It didn't matter how they got here. It mattered how we raised them from here on out. "You know," Barbara said gently, watching the 2 children, "Richard called again yesterday." "Still trying to talk you into reconciliation?" Linda asked, though her tone already knew the answer. Barbara straightened her back and said calmly, "I told him I've already found a better version of family." Later that night, after Jennifer and baby Hope were sleeping and the others had left for their hotels, I sat outside in the hospital garden with Dylan asleep in his stroller beside me. My laptop was open, and the blinking cursor on the screen waited for my final words. The last chapter of my book was almost finished. They say the moment that breaks you can also be the one that makes you. When Brandon walked away from me and our newborn son in this same hospital 1 year ago, he thought he was continuing a family tradition, one of running, abandoning, controlling. But instead he started something else. He accidentally created a movement of women rebuilding themselves and each other. Today, I held another woman's hand as she brought life into the world. She wasn't alone like I had been. She had an army behind her. She had love. Sometimes the best families aren't the ones we're born into or the ones we marry into. Sometimes they're the ones we build, through truth, through shared pain, and through healing. My son will grow up seeing what real strength looks like. He'll see it in his mother, who turned betrayal into purpose. He'll see it in his Aunt Jennifer, who chose hope over bitterness. He'll see it in the women who refused to let cowards define their story. The Harrison men spent decades perfecting the art of abandonment. But in doing so, they taught us the power of staying strong, staying honest, staying together. A breeze passed through the garden, soft and calm. I saved the document and closed the laptop. More messages from the network waited on my phone. More women reaching out, more stories waiting to be heard, more lives beginning to heal. Tomorrow would bring new battles. The work was never really over. But tonight, sitting beneath a quiet sky with my son sleeping beside me and peace finally settling in my heart, I felt only one thing: gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that showed me my strength. Gratitude for the women who stood beside me. And, strangely, gratitude for Brandon. 'Cause he tried to break me. But instead, he set me free as the months passed, our lives quietly but powerfully transformed. What had begun as a moment of collapse became the foundation for something solid, something permanent. The Financial Abuse Recovery Network expanded beyond what we ever imagined. We partnered with legal clinics, universities, and shelters across the country. More women stepped forward, sharing their stories with trembling voices and determined hearts. Many didn't even realize what they'd been through had a name, until they heard ours. Jennifer and I took turns leading workshops. Hope, now a chubby, bright-eyed baby, often babbled in the back of the classroom beside Dylan, who'd grown into a strong-willed toddler. Our children played together while we taught others how to protect their financial futures. We stood in front of rooms full of women who reminded us of ourselves, tired, unsure, but full of potential they hadn't yet realized. Barbara joined every event she could, often funding the travel expenses quietly from her personal savings. She became our bridge to women from her generation, those who had lived in silence for decades, too ashamed to speak, too conditioned to question. But now they were speaking. Some came forward with stories older than my marriage, stories hidden behind church doors, country clubs, and closed bedrooms. Daniel became more involved, too. We collaborated on a school pilot program for young men, teaching respect, empathy, and emotional literacy alongside financial education. His presence helped shift the conversation. "I spent my whole life trying not to be like my father," he once said during a classroom visit. "But no one ever showed me how. Until now." The settlement offers from Brandon's lawyers never stopped. Every few weeks, they arrived with new terms, higher amounts, and thicker non-disclosure clauses. I never replied. I didn't need to. They were losing their power. Brandon himself stayed silent for the most part. Once the federal investigation moved forward, his voice fell quiet. Publicly, he stepped back from the firm. Privately, he tried to discredit us. But it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out. People had seen the emails, the paper trails, the patterns. And more importantly, they had seen the women who refused to back down. My book hit the shelves in the fall. Silent Ledgers. How Financial Abuse Hides in Plain Sight. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its people. Therapists, lawyers, teachers, and survivors sent letters and emails. One high school principal from Ohio called me in tears. She had recognized a student's story in the chapter about hidden debt. "I thought she was just acting out," the woman said. "But she's being trapped. And now we're helping her. Because of your words." Those words no longer felt like mine alone. They belonged to all of us. Every woman who had been told she was imagining things, every woman who'd signed something she didn't understand because she trusted the wrong person, every woman who'd been left with nothing but still stood up again. We celebrated the network's one-year anniversary with a quiet gathering. No big press release. Just us. The same women who once felt powerless sitting in a circle, laughing, eating homemade cake, passing around sleepy children, and talking about what came next. I stood in the doorway that evening, watching Dylan chase a giggling Hope around Linda's garden while Barbara refilled everyone's tea. Jennifer sat nearby, her head tilted back, smiling, eyes full of peace. For the first time since I met her, she looked completely at ease. Ellen appeared beside me with a soft smile. "So," she said, nudging me gently. "What now?" I looked out at the people who had become my family. The ones who stood with me, fought beside me, and taught me that healing didn't always mean erasing the pain. It meant growing around it, like roots cracking through stone. "I don't know exactly," I said. "But whatever it is, we'll build it together." And we would. We already were. Because what started as one woman left behind in a hospital room had become a movement, a promise to the next generation. That they would not be trapped in the same silence. That they would be taught to recognize danger not just in fists, but in signatures and smiles. That they would see strength not just in independence, but in community. Brandon didn't know it that day, but when he walked away from us, he left a space wide enough to fill with power, connection, and truth. A space where women like me stopped being quiet. A space where we stayed. Where we thrived. Where we chose each other. And we're still here. We always will be. That winter, as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, our work only deepened. We weren't just responding to what had happened to us anymore. We were preparing others. We created toolkits for schools, checklists for newlyweds, guides for young professionals opening their first joint accounts. I traveled with Dylan to community centers and college campuses, telling our story to rooms filled with wide eyes and quiet gasps. Jennifer often joined me, hope on her hip, both of us speaking not from theory, but from lived survival. We began to see real change. States introduced legislation recognizing financial abuse as a distinct form of domestic violence. Courts started asking new questions during divorce proceedings. Banks began flagging suspicious joint activity. The world wasn't changing fast, but it was changing. Still, there were setbacks. We lost funding in 2 cities. One of our cases fell apart when a judge dismissed financial manipulation as just a bad breakup. Some media outlets tried to paint us as angry ex-wives. Brandon's father gave an interview filled with vague denials and elegant lies. But by then it didn't sting. People were watching. And people were listening. One evening, Dylan came home from daycare with a crayon drawing. 2 stick figures. One big, one small. Both smiling, standing beneath a bright yellow sun. "It's us, Mommy," he said proudly. "Just us." I hugged him close, my throat tight. There were days I still remembered the hospital room, the cold silence after Brandon left, the sound of Dylan's first cry echoing in the hollow space he left behind. And there were nights I still lay awake, wondering how many women were sitting in similar rooms, holding their babies, wondering how they'd survive. But then morning would come. And so would another message from a woman who had found our site. Another teenager asking if they could start a financial safety club at their school. Another counselor requesting materials for a shelter. Another story, another hand reaching through the dark. And we'd answer. Every time. On the 2nd anniversary of Brandon's departure, I returned to that hospital. Not to remember the pain, but to mark what followed. Jennifer and I hosted a workshop there for hospital social workers, teaching them how to identify red flags before women were discharged into danger. We shared our stories in the very hallway where I once sat shaking, alone and afraid. After the session, I walked outside to the garden where I had finished the final chapter of my book. Dylan played by the flowers, older now, more confident. Hope chased behind him, giggling. They were growing up in a world their fathers had never prepared for, one built by the strength of the women who refused to be broken. Barbara joined me on the bench, a small journal in her hands. "Daniel sent me a note," she said, smiling. "He's starting a program for boys from single-parent homes. He said he's doing it for all the little Harrisons who never got a proper example." I smiled softly, watching the children run through the garden paths. "It's strange, isn't it?" said. "How something so cruel created all of this." "It wasn't the cruelty that built it," she replied. "It was what you did with it." I sat quietly for a while, the cold air brushing my cheeks, the children's laughter wrapping around me like a blanket. There was no ribbon-wrapped ending, no perfect justice. But there was progress. There was connection. And there was healing, slow and stubborn but real. That night, as I tucked Dylan into bed, he asked me, "Why did Daddy leave?" I paused, brushing his hair gently from his forehead. "Because he didn't understand what it meant to stay," I said. "But we did. And that made all the difference." He nodded, content with that answer, then turned over and drifted to sleep. I stood there in the quiet for a long time, listening to his soft breathing, feeling the weight of every woman's voice that had joined mine in the years since that terrible morning. We had all been broken in some way. Laid, trapped, abandoned. But none of us stayed there. We learned to rise, to rebuild, to reach back for the next one in line. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were the architects of something new,